There are moments in life when everything quietly falls apart, not with noise, but with weight, the kind you don't see, but carry, the kind that sits in the chest long after the world has moved on. This is a story about that weight, and about what happens when a person finally learns to set it down. In a weathered coastal town where the sea never stopped speaking, there lived a man named Jonah Hale. He was known as a sailor, but what defined him was not the miles he had crossed. It was the moment he never escaped. A single failure that rewrote his sense of purpose, strength, and self-worth. This story isn't about the ocean. It's about regret, letting go, and the quiet courage it takes to begin again. Because healing doesn't arrive when we fight the past. It begins when we stop holding it. Jonah Hale woke before the sun, not because he needed to, but because sleep no longer trusted him. The room was quiet in the way only coastal mornings are. Not silent, just patient. The faint sound of water pressing against the shore slipped through the open window, as if the sea itself was breathing nearby. Jonah lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar weight settle into his chest. It was there every morning, unannounced, unavoidable. He rose with discipline, the kind learned through repetition rather than motivation. Bed made tight, clothes folded the night before, coffee brewed the same way every day without deviation. His life had become precise, controlled, predictable, and empty. The town knew Jonah as reliable, quiet, strong in the way that didn't ask for attention. He worked near the docks, repairing boats that no longer belonged to him. People nodded when they passed him. Some respected him. Some pitied him. No one asked questions anymore, because Jonah never offered answers. Once the sea had been his language. He had known its moods, its warnings, its promises. Once he believed discipline and devotion were enough, that if you showed up every day, if you stayed loyal to the work, life would eventually reward you with meaning. That belief still lived inside him, but it was fractured now, bent around a single memory he refused to name. Jonah walked the same path each morning, past weathered houses and old ropes coiled like sleeping animals. The harbor opened slowly before him, gray-blue and endless. Boats moved in and out, captained by men younger than he was now, men who still believed time was generous. He never watched them leave. Instead, Jonah stood near the edge, hands in his pockets, shoulders steady, eyes distant. From the outside, he looked calm, grounded, whole. Inside, he was still standing in the past. There was a moment, years ago, when everything had asked something of him. Courage, letting go, choice. And Jonah had hesitated. Not loudly, not dramatically, just long enough. That hesitation had cost him more than he could explain. Since then, he had stayed behind, not just from the sea, but from joy, from risk, from himself. He told himself it was responsibility, that staying small was maturity, that holding on to regret was a form of honor. But regret is not loyalty, and punishment is not purpose. Jonah didn't know that yet. He believed strength meant carrying the weight without complaint. He believed healing would come someday, on its own, if he proved he deserved it. So he waited, and worked, and endured. Days passed, seasons changed, the sea remained, and somewhere beneath Jonah's discipline, beneath the silence, beneath the control, there was a quiet truth forming. Not loud enough to confront him yet, but patient, waiting for the moment he would finally stop running from what had already happened and begin the journey forward. Before regret had weight, the sea had given Jonah direction. There was a time when his mornings began with purpose instead of pressure, when his hands moved with confidence, not caution. Back then, the horizon felt like an invitation, not a reminder of what he'd lost. Jonah had learned discipline early, not the harsh kind, but the steady kind. Wake before dawn. Respect the weather. Prepare twice for what might come once. While others chased shortcuts, he stayed patient. While others spoke loudly about their dreams, Jonah worked quietly toward his. The sea noticed that. It rewarded him with small victories at first: clean crossings, smooth landings, trust from older sailors who rarely gave it. He earned a reputation without trying: reliable, focused, calm under pressure. When storms came, Jonah didn't panic. He adjusted. He listened. And because of that, success found him slowly, honestly. There were nights when he stood on the deck, salt on his skin, stars overhead, feeling something close to peace. Not happiness exactly, but alignment, as if his effort and the world were finally speaking the same language. This was who Jonah believed he was meant to be. But hidden inside that rise was a quiet flaw: not arrogance, not recklessness, attachment. Jonah didn't just value discipline, he depended on it. He didn't just find purpose in the sea, he tied his entire identity to it. Every success became proof of worth. Every calm voyage became a promise that if he kept doing everything right, nothing bad would ever happen. He believed control could protect him. And when life reinforces that belief enough times, it begins to feel like truth. Jonah took on more responsibility, longer routes, harder conditions. He told himself it was growth, and it was, partly. But beneath it lived something else: the fear of stopping, the fear that if he slowed down, something would catch up to him. So he kept going. There were people who cared for him then, voices that asked him to rest, to come ashore more often, to imagine a life wider than the tide. Jonah listened but didn't hear, because when the sea answers you, it's easy to believe it always will. Looking back, this was the rise that mattered most, not because of the success, but because it set the trap. It taught Jonah that discipline alone was strength, that letting go was weakness, and that purpose could be earned only through endurance. He didn't know yet that even the strongest sailors face storms they cannot outwork. He didn't know that failure doesn't always arrive as chaos. Sometimes it arrives as a single moment, when everything you've built asks you to release control, and you don't. The sea was still answering him then, but it was already preparing the question that would change everything. The night everything changed did not begin with fear. It began like any other crossing: quiet confidence, familiar routines, a sky Jonah had read 100 times before. The boat cut through the water smoothly, the engine steady, the wind obedient. Jonah trusted the sea that night. More than that, he trusted himself. He had done this before, many times. But storms don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they wait for certainty. The first sign was subtle: a shift in the wind, a hesitation in the water. Jonah noticed it, adjusted course slightly, told himself it was nothing. Discipline had taught him to stay calm. Experience had taught him not to overreact. Minutes later, the sea answered differently. Waves rose faster than expected. The horizon disappeared into darkness. Rain came down hard, blurring distance and direction. Jonah moved with precision, hands steady, heart focused. This was where discipline mattered most. This was where he believed he belonged. Then something went wrong. Not dramatically, not all at once. A decision delayed. A calculation trusted too much. A moment where Jonah chose control over caution because he always had, and it had always worked. Until it didn't. The boat lurched violently. Equipment shifted. The engine strained. Jonah felt it then. That tightening in the chest that no amount of preparation can erase. He fought to regain stability, to correct the course, to prove that effort could still overpower circumstance. But the sea does not negotiate. In the chaos that followed, time fractured, sounds blurred, movements became instinct. Jonah did everything he knew how to do, everything he had trained for, everything discipline had promised him would be enough. It wasn't. By the time the storm passed, something essential was gone. The boat survived. Jonah survived. But survival is not the same as being whole. When dawn arrived, pale and indifferent, Jonah sat in silence, staring at the wreckage left behind, not just around him, but inside him. What he lost that night cannot be measured cleanly. It wasn't only material. It wasn't only a person, or a role, or a future. It was certainty. The belief that doing everything right guaranteed safety. The belief that strength could prevent loss. The belief that discipline alone could hold life together. Jonah returned to shore changed, though no one noticed at first. He spoke less, slept less, smiled only when required. The town welcomed him back with relief, but Jonah felt none. Because while everyone else saw survival, Jonah saw failure. And failure, when it's not faced, does something dangerous. It becomes identity. That night did not break Jonah loudly. It didn't destroy him in a way others could see. It sank into him slowly, settled deep, and stayed. Jonah never told the story the way it happened. When people asked, he simplified it. Weather turned. Bad luck. Wrong timing. He kept the words practical, clean, distant. He spoke as if the night belonged to the sea. Not to him. But alone, the truth replayed itself with cruel precision. Every detail, every choice, every second where he might have acted differently. Jonah carried those moments the way some people carry photographs, taking them out in silence, studying them in the dark, putting them away carefully so no one else could see. He believed remembering was necessary, that forgetting would mean betrayal, that letting go would mean disrespect to what was lost. So he held on. His days became narrower. He avoided long conversations. He avoided the horizon. The sea was still there, but it no longer felt like language. It felt like accusation, a reminder of the moment he had misread everything. Jonah told himself that discipline would save him again, that if he worked harder, stayed stricter, lived smaller, he could somehow balance the scale. Punishment became routine. Early mornings, long hours, no rest that wasn't earned through exhaustion. He mistook suffering for accountability. At night, sleep came in fragments. When it did, it dragged the past with it. He woke with clenched fists, jaw tight, heart racing. Not from fear of the storm, but from fear of forgetting the lesson he believed the pain was teaching him. People noticed the change. Some tried to reach him. "You can't carry this forever," they said. Jonah nodded, but he didn't hear them. Because in his mind, carrying it was the point. If he put it down, even for a moment, what would that say about the weight of what he lost? Regret became his anchor. It kept him from drifting forward. It kept him from risking joy. It kept him close to the past, where everything still felt real, even if it hurt. The more time passed, the more Jonah confused memory with meaning. He believed that staying in pain honored the past, that healing would erase responsibility, that peace would somehow make him careless again. So he stayed vigilant, rigid, unforgiving, and slowly, quietly, the world continued without him. Boats came and went, seasons changed, new sailors learned the tides. Jonah repaired vessels, gave advice, fixed what others broke, never noticing that he refused to repair himself, because holding the wreckage felt safer than facing the open water again. But there is a truth Jonah had not yet learned. Clinging to what broke you does not keep it alive. It only keeps you frozen in the moment it ended. And every day he stayed there, life waited, patiently, on the other side of his grip. There comes a point when pain grows tired of screaming. For Jonah, that point arrived without ceremony. No breakdown, no tears, just a long stretch of silence where even regret seemed to lose its sharp edges. The days blurred together, not because they were busy, but because they were empty. He still woke early, still worked hard, still followed his routines with careful precision. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. Discipline remained intact, but inside, something had gone missing. The ache that once drove him had dulled into numbness. Joy no longer felt forbidden, it felt irrelevant. The sea could rage or rest, it no longer stirred anything in him. Jonah had reached a place beyond grief, where even sadness requires more energy than the heart can give. This was the quietest point of his soul. He stopped expecting anything from the future. Hope felt like a language he once knew but no longer spoke. Plans dissolved. Curiosity faded. Life became something to endure, not explore. And in that stillness, Jonah began to disappear from himself. He spent more time alone than necessary. Meals were simple, forgettable. Evenings passed without markers. He would sit near the shore sometimes, watching the water move without meaning, as if it belonged to someone else's life. There were moments, small, unsettling ones, when he wondered if this was all there would ever be. Not pain, not healing, just existing. A body moving through time without purpose or resistance. Strangely, that thought didn't frighten it. It felt honest. When people reached out now, Jonah found no energy to explain. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was simply tired. Tired of carrying. Tired of resisting. Tired of remembering the man he used to be. This is the danger of unprocessed failure. Not that it breaks you, but that it convinces you nothing more is possible. Jonah stood at the edge of his life, not in despair, but in surrender to emptiness. A place where change no longer feels necessary, because nothing feels important enough to fight for. And yet, this lowest point held something he didn't recognize. Space. When the noise finally fades, when the guilt loosens its grip, when the story you've been telling yourself runs out of words, there is room for a new truth to enter. Jonah didn't know it yet. He couldn't feel it yet. But the quiet he had fallen into was not an ending. It was the moment just before something gentle and irreversible would interrupt his stillness. The encounter didn't feel important at first. It happened on a morning like any other. Gray sky, calm water, the air carrying the familiar scent of salt and damp wood. Jonah was walking the shoreline without intention. his thoughts moving slower than his steps. That's when he noticed the stranger. An older man sat on a weathered bench near the water, tossing small pieces of bread into the sea. The birds gathered without urgency, as if they trusted him. He didn't look like someone waiting for anything, just present. Jonah would have passed by as he always did. But something about the stillness stopped him. Not curiosity, recognition. He stood a few steps away, silent. The stranger didn't look up at first. He spoke as if Jonah had already been there for a while. "Funny thing about the sea," the man said softly. "It carries what you release, but it drowns what you cling to." Jonah felt the words land before he understood them. He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not sure that's true," he replied. His voice sounded rough, unused. The man smiled, not in agreement, not in challenge, just gently. "You don't have to be sure, just honest." They sat in silence after that. The waves moved in and out, indifferent, patient. Jonah felt an unfamiliar urge to speak without defending himself. "I stayed," Jonah said finally, "when I shouldn't have." The man nodded. "Most people do." Jonah frowned. "Then why does it feel like I'm the only one still paying for it?" "Because you're still holding the moment like it's happening now," the stranger said. "Time passed. You didn't." That sentence cut deeper than any accusation ever could. Jonah stared at the water. "If I let it go," he said quietly, "it feels like I'm saying it didn't matter." The man shook his head slowly. "Letting go doesn't erase meaning. It releases you from repeating the pain." Jonah said nothing. His chest tightened, not with guilt, but with something unfamiliar. Relief. The stranger stood, brushing crumbs from his hands. "You don't need forgiveness from the past," he said. "You need permission to live beyond it." Then, as simply as he had appeared, he walked away. Jonah remained seated long after the bench beside him emptied. The sea continued its rhythm. The world continued its pace. But something inside Jonah had shifted. Not dramatically, not completely, just enough. The weight he carried hadn't vanished, but for the first time it felt movable, like something that could be set down, piece by piece, if he chose. That morning didn't heal Jonah. It gave him a choice. And sometimes that's where rebirth truly begins. Change did not arrive as courage. It arrived as permission. Jonah did not wake the next morning transformed. The weight was still there. The habits still waited. But something subtle had shifted. The belief that holding on was the only way to remain loyal to the past. So he started small. He allowed himself moments without punishment. A longer breath, a slower walk. He didn't correct every thought the moment it strayed. He noticed the guilt rise, and instead of feeding it, he let it pass. This was discipline of a different kind. Jonah returned to the shoreline, not to remember, but to observe. The sea still moved. It always had. Loss had not frozen it. Neither had regret. Life continued without requiring his suffering. At first this realization angered him. Then it humbled him. He began repairing boats with care instead of urgency. He stopped arriving early just to prove something to himself. He listened more, spoke less, but with intention. Acceptance wasn't loud. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaling after holding breath for years. Jonah noticed how often he had been reliving the past instead of learning from it. How memory had become a loop instead of a lesson. Letting go didn't erase responsibility. It clarified it. Responsibility meant growth, not endless self-punishment. Some days were harder than others. There were mornings when the old story returned, demanding attention. Jonah didn't fight it anymore. He acknowledged it, then chose to move forward anyway. That choice, repeated quietly, began to change him. He allowed joy in small forms, warm meals, conversation without retreat, moments of calm that no longer felt undeserved. For the first time since the night everything sank, Jonah felt present, not fearless, not healed, present. And presence, he learned, is where healing starts. The discipline that once kept him trapped now became the tool that set him free. Not discipline rooted in control, but discipline rooted in care. Care for his body, his mind, his remaining time. Jonah did not forgive himself all at once. He practiced. And with practice came steadiness. With steadiness came strength. Not the kind that resists pain, but the kind that allows it without letting it define you. The past still existed. It always would. But it no longer decided the direction of his life. Healing is not a straight line. Jonah learned that on a day when nothing went wrong and everything felt heavy again. The morning began calmly. The sea was gentle, the air clear. And yet as Jonah worked near the docks, a familiar tightness crept into his chest. A thought he hadn't invited returned fully formed, sharp and demanding. You're pretending. This peace is temporary. You don't deserve it. The old storm had found its way back. Jonah felt the pull immediately, the urge to retreat, to punish himself, to replay the past until the numbness returned. This was familiar territory, safe in its own way. For a moment he stood still, caught between who he had been and who he was becoming. Then he remembered something simple. He remembered that discipline did not mean obedience to pain. It meant consistency in choice. So he kept working, not with force, with awareness. When his hands shook, he let them. When the memory surged, he named it and continued anyway. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He stayed. The storm passed more quietly than he expected. Later that week, another test came. A conversation, a reminder, a name spoken aloud that reopened old space inside him. The guilt rose again, demanding attention, demanding payment. This time Jonah felt tired, but not defeated. He understood now that the past would always knock. Transformation did not mean the door would never shake. It meant he no longer had to let the past take control of the room. Strength, Jonah realized, was not the absence of struggle. It was the refusal to abandon yourself when struggle returned. He allowed the discomfort to exist without assigning it meaning, without turning it into a verdict about who he was. And something surprising happened. The emotion lost its grip. It moved through him instead of trapping him. This was the real work. Not grand gestures, not dramatic change, just showing up again and again when the old patterns tried to reclaim him. Some days he succeeded fully, some days only partially. Both counted. Jonah stopped measuring progress by how good he felt. He measured it by how gently he responded to himself when he didn't. And in that gentleness a deeper kind of courage emerged. Not loud, not visible, but unshakable. The old storm still existed. It always would. But it no longer defined the weather of his life. One morning Jonah realized he was no longer counting days. There had been a time when every sunrise felt like something to endure. Every sunset a quiet relief. Now the hours moved without resistance. Not because life had become perfect, but because he had stopped fighting where he stood. He returned to the water differently, not as a man seeking control, not as someone trying to prove resilience, but as someone willing to participate again. Jonah began taking short trips along the coast, not to escape, but to reconnect. The sea felt familiar without feeling threatening. It no longer spoke in accusations, it spoke in motion. He listened. Purpose no longer felt like something he had to earn through suffering. It revealed itself through presence, through care, through the simple act of being useful without self-erasure. He mentored younger sailors, not with authority, but with honesty. He shared what discipline could do and what it could not protect you from. He didn't offer guarantees. He offered perspective, and that was enough. Peace arrived quietly. It didn't announce itself. It showed up in moments Jonah used to overlook: steady hands, clear breath, laughter that didn't feel borrowed. The horizon still stretched endlessly ahead, but it no longer demanded anything from him. Jonah understood now that purpose isn't always found in pushing forward. Sometimes it's found in standing still long enough to recognize you've already survived. He had not become fearless. He had become grounded. And grounding changed everything. The man who once stayed behind had learned how to move again. Not away from the past, but beyond it. The sea remained a part of his life, but no longer its ruler. He lived forward now, with humility, with intention, with peace that did not depend on control. The horizon hadn't changed. He had. If you're listening to this, there is a chance you are carrying something too. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, every day. Maybe it's a failure you replay in your head, a moment you wish you could return to and fix, a version of yourself you believe you abandoned. Here is what Jonah's journey offers, not as instruction, but as truth. Failure is not the end of your story unless you build your home inside it. Discipline is powerful, but without compassion it becomes a cage. Holding on does not honor the past, it only prevents the future. Letting go is not forgetting, it is choosing not to bleed forever from the same wound. Healing does not arrive all at once. It arrives in small permissions: the permission to rest, the permission to feel joy without guilt, the permission to live forward. Courage is not always action. Sometimes courage is staying present when the old pain returns and choosing not to punish yourself for being human. Your purpose is not erased by one moment. It adapts, it waits, it reshapes itself around who you become after the fall. Rebirth does not mean becoming someone new. It means returning to yourself without the weight you were never meant to carry forever. And peace, real peace, is not found in control. It is found in acceptance. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to sit with it. Share it with someone who might be carrying unseen weight. And if you want more stories like this, stories about healing, strength, failure, and rebirth, stay connected. Because your journey is not over, and the horizon ahead of you is still wide open. Like, share, subscribe.